Good day, everyone. This is our second interview for RaLei Media Interviews. And tonight we're going to have a special interview with the founder of the Scottish Resistance, Mr. James Scott. And for people that don't know him, he started the Scottish Resistance in 2014, but he will explain it much better than I can. So here we go. Computer. Good evening, everyone. This is Raymond from RaLei Media, and this is our second interview for our platform. And it's with none other than the founder of the Scottish Resistance, Mr. James Scott. How are you doing, James?
I'm fine, Raymond. How are you?
I'm doing good. Just to tell the people, you were talking, but I didn't see your mouth moving, but that's the connection. Probably it's
Right.
not like he's a ventriloquist on top of an activist.
Oh, I'm
But
not a ventriloquist, no. Not by any means.
well, it's great having you on the show, James.
No bother.
For some reason that people don't know you or the Scottish Resistance, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how the Scottish Resistance, how and why the Scottish Resistance was started, and when, of course.
Yeah, I can give you a rundown on how this came about. Back in 2014 at the referendum, it was supposed to be a fair referendum, but we all know it wasn't because Westminster called in all the heads of industry and took them to Downing Street and warned everybody not to vote for independence. Or there would be repercussions. People would lose their jobs, people would lose their pensions. And while we're talking about pensions, let it be known that the lowest pension in the modern world is in this so-called UK, this horrible regime. Also, a lot of people in companies in Scotland were told that if they voted for independence, they would lose their job. It was the most unfair referendum in human history.
Losing the pensions.
Honestly.
Losing the
Yeah.
pensions.
Losing their pension. And it's the lowest pension in Europe, and they told pensioners they would lose their pension. Bank managers called some of their customers in, told them that they would lose all their finance in their bank account if they voted for independence. It was the biggest scare tactics that have ever been known on this planet against people making a choice of independence for their country. It was truly dreadful beyond belief. So before the vote had even taken place, I'm saying to myself, they're going to rig this. So early September 2014, that's when the Scottish Resistance started. And I got other like-minded people on board to protest alongside myself with the Scottish Resistance. One of them is quite famous, a guy called Sean Clerkin. He's infamous, more like he's got his supporters and he's got people who criticise him because he thinks he's going too far. But honestly, I've come to the conclusion he's not gone too far. He's against violence. He might be a bit loud when he's on a loud hailer or a PA system. He might be a bit loud, but he's certainly not a violent person. I know that from knowing the man since 2014. So Scottish Resistance started in 2014 because we knew the referendum was going to be rigged. Not only did they rigged it to be exactly 45%, which means a lot if you're Scottish, because that's when Scotland was finally subdued in their eyes after the 45 rebellion, 1745. And it's so obvious this was rigged, 45%, 45 rebellion. So after September 2014, that's when we started all our protests against all the injustices that Scotland suffers under this horrible, horrible regime in Westminster. We did protests against war criminals like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, etc. We protested against Raytheon, which is a factory in the east of Scotland which manufactures bombs which have been used in the Yemen used to kill people in the Yemen, which is absolutely disgusting. We've been out there to Raytheon factory many times to protest against that. We protested against Tunnock's tea cakes because they changed their product from being Scottish tea cakes to being British tea cakes. And of course, if you do that and you're running the company, you get awarded an MBE. And that's exactly what happened to the guy that was running the company. You get a little badge of honour for supporting the union, which is unfair for most of the people, whether they be in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, England, it doesn't matter, because we have got the lowest pension in Europe. We've got the highest energy prices, the highest gas prices, the highest petrol prices, and the lowest pension. You just couldn't make this up, by the way.
No.
But one thing they are good at is brainwashing. They hold 100% control of all the media, that being television, radio, newspapers. I don't think there's anywhere in the world where the government has 100% control of the media. But that's exactly the way it is under the Westminster regime. I mean, there's
Let me make a small correction in that the mainstream media,
yeah,
but
mainstream
because
media.
they don't own platforms like ours, like Independence Live,
Yeah,
and that we need more like that.
yes,
Actually, but
we do.
yeah,
Yes, we
so
do.
99.9.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, but before the likes of these platforms came along, and we were able to contact through Facebook and Zoom. Before that came along, they had total 100%
Yeah,
control of the media. I mean,
exactly.
they have been considering over the years doing away with Facebook. Certainly, people who are outspoken on Facebook, Twitter, etc., are censored and were stopped. They actually stop us getting out to a bigger audience. It's all part of control by the Westminster regime.
Yeah.
So, any questions you want to ask me on that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Sean before, and
Yes.
yeah, he's always been about no violence. Basically, he's his own worst enemy, but none
Yeah.
others, not ours. I mean, and I applaud him for doing what he does.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the way sometimes he does it, but
Yeah.
he's the most reliable one. If he says he's going to show up, he's going to show up,
Yeah.
and that's
He is
always.
the one. He's got. I've got to say, I've had a lot of arguments with Sean, but
Oh
of
yeah.
all the activists, of the people I call activists, when he says he's going to turn up, he will turn up.
Yeah.
Whereas I know others that call themselves activists that say they'll turn up, and half the time they don't turn up.
Yeah,
He is 100% reliable. When he says he's going to turn up, he will turn up.
definitely. The Scottish Resistance, which I joined up in, was it 2016, something like that, 2015,
Yes, I think
2016.
it was. Yes,
And I wanted to still be a part of it. Have to set up the site, of course, the chat show on every Monday again from the 29th, I think we start again.
that's right.
Um, there are mainly two things that the Scottish Resistance are really known for, and that's the protest, by far number one, and the history, and that all mainly falls onto you because the fountain of knowledge of Scottish history.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that people really tune into the show as well every single week. And what made you so knowledgeable about history? How did you get so interested in history?
Yeah, well, I can answer that, but just quickly, let me tell you about what you say about the protests. The Scottish Resistance are Scotland's number one
Yeah,
protesters. As I was mentioning there, we protested against Tunnock's tea cakes, against war criminals. We have occupied the Scottish Parliament because of the bedroom two tax, and we were part of many groups that protested against it, and that stopped
yeah,
bedroom two tax coming in. We protest against all sorts of things, and we just keep up the protests. The recent protests that we're doing just now, and we've done a number of them, is against the high energy rises, which are the highest rises in Europe. Expected to go up to 300% rises in electricity and gas. So we're actually going to be doing a protest again next week. We're doing protests almost every week now against the high energy rises. Now, on history, when I was a wee boy in school, I learned the story of William Wallace. And our most famous poet is called Rabbie Burns. And he made a quote about William Wallace. He says, "The story of William Wallace poured the tide of Scottish prejudice into my veins that will boil till the floodgates of life shut in eternal rest." And that's the way I feel about the story of William Wallace. This was a man who was actually born in a free Scotland. He was 16 years of age at the time Edward I invaded Scotland. What happened was later on, a few years later, he got married and was living in a wee town in Scotland called Lanark. And one day he was walking through the town in Lanark and he was approached by some English soldiers who said, "What right has a Scotsman got to wear such fine clothes?" So words came to blows, and Wallace started fighting with these English soldiers and had to disappear because he was outnumbered. He did a runner and hid in the woods. But there's always people who backstab you, and there was Scots who told the English soldiers where his house was. What Wallace didn't think was going to happen was that these English soldiers turned up at his house, and his wife, Marion, was in the house, just a teenager, probably 18 or 19. They don't know the exact age, but they reckon she was about 18 or 19. And the English soldiers burnt the house to the ground with his wife inside. So, of course, he was enraged and was out for revenge. I went after the sheriff of the town in Lanark, a guy called Hazelrig, and he killed Hazelrig in an act of revenge. And that was the start of the rise of William Wallace to fight for Scotland's freedom. He couldn't stand these people that had invaded our land and had taken over, and he wanted to get rid of them out of our land. And he was quite successful for a few years. He managed to have great successes, mainly like Stirling Bridge, where they invaded, when the invading army was going over the bridge, Wallace and his men swooped. And even though it was a bigger army from England, they managed to win the day there. Also won a battle in Glasgow at the top of what is now the High Street. Glasgow Castle used to stand there. And he won a battle there as well. He won various small battles as well. He was more like a guerrilla fighter rather than a commander of a huge army in an open battlefield, because that's when he did fun stuff. When it was a major battle, and that took place in Falkirk in 1298, July 1298, in an open field, it was against a much bigger army, and Wallace's army was totally decimated in July of 1298. And he had to flee after that. And he went round Europe trying to drum up support from other countries to help Scotland, who had been invaded by a much larger country, England. And he reappeared in 1303 in Scotland and took part in the Battle of Roslin. By that time, the leader of the Scottish army was a guy called the Red Comyn. And the Red Comyn was a rival of Robert the Bruce. But nevertheless, the Red Comyn won the Battle of Roslin. He led the Scots at the Battle of Roslin on the 24th of February, 1303, and won the day. He also had two famous Scottish patriots by his side in the command, Simon Fraser and John Fraser. Now, the thing about most of the people that appeared at that battle, although they won the day at that battle, most of these people did end up being killed by the English. William Wallace fought at that battle under the Red Comyn. and he was captured on 5th August 1305. He was taken to Smithfield in London, and he was hung, drawn, and quartered. Two commanders in the army, Simon Fraser and his brother John Fraser, were also captured by the English and taken to Smithfield in London, where they were hung, drawn, and quartered. William Wallace's brother, John Wallace, was also captured and taken to Smithfield, where he was hung, drawn, and quartered. And many other Scots, maybe not as high ranking, but many other Scots suffered the same fate. So William Wallace was killed on 23rd August 1305.
I mean, a lot of people know bits and pieces of the story of William Wallace, of course. Especially when you got a movie coming out years ago, Braveheart, which was, as you say, historically completely incorrect. You're not a fan.
I'm not a fan.
No,
Let me put it this way. I'm a fan of the movie in that it did generate support for Scottish
definitely,
independence.
definitely.
It's so historically
Yeah,
inaccurate. You
yeah.
make it up. This
But
guy that wrote it, just to let you know, the guy that wrote it is a guy called Randall Wallace, an American of Scottish descent. He came over to Scotland and started asking people about William Wallace, and most folk didn't know. We're the only country in the world that is a national hero, where most of the folk don't know who he is.
yeah. Well,
Randall Wallace, yeah,
that's exactly the point that I wanted to make is that, and
yeah,
that's one of the reasons that Scottish Resistance try to put a history section in every one of our shows.
yeah, yeah,
A lot of people don't know anything about their history, and
yes.
I know we've talked about this on the show on numerous times, but what is the exact reason that people don't know their own history?
Well, if you
Well,
examine
no, but
any Yeah, if you examine any imperial power that runs another country, they've got to suppress the history of the country that they are subduing and holding on to. The same thing's happening in Australia. They don't want the Aborigines to know about their history because they suffered badly. Hundreds of thousands of them were wiped out when white people took over Australia. It's dreadful. They used their heads as footballs. I mean, it was disgusting what went on. And this is the same in any imperial power that runs another country. They suppress the history because history is one of the most important factors in a nation's identity. If you don't
definitely,
know yourself, you're not going anywhere.
definitely, definitely. Well, knowing what you just told us about William Wallace brings us basically to an event that's taking place tomorrow in London. Would you tell us all about that event?
Yes, I can tell you about that. Some activists from the Scottish Resistance are leaving tonight to travel overnight down to London. We'll be arriving at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. And what will happen is that we're going to go later in the morning to Westminster, where we're going to protest. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we're a protest group. We're going to protest against the high energy costs, the high petrol prices, and everything that's wrong with Westminster. And we've done this sort of thing before, by the way, protest in front of Westminster, and we always get good response from the thousands of tourists which are always round about Westminster. And many of them come up, shake my hand, and say, "Isn't it brilliant that you can talk against these people and have the nerve to stand in front of this building and tell it as it truly is?" Because some of these people are from countries that were former British colonies, and they know how they suffered under British rule.
Yeah,
The Brits stole trillions and trillions from other countries, and sadly, all the money went into the hands of the monarchy and the multi-rich. None of it even went to ordinary citizens in England. As I mentioned earlier, they have the lowest pension in the modern world. None of the money they stole ever went to help their own citizens, ordinary citizens. And the British Museum, we've got to talk about that. There's about 4 floors, and on every floor is stuff that they stole from other countries. They stole so much from other countries, it's unbelievable. Even the jewel in the crown of the Queen of England is the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which they stole from India, and it's worth $1 billion, $1 billion. The diamond that is in the crown of the Queen of England, and quite honestly, it should be going back to India, along with the Elgin marbles that should go back to Greece, and so many other artifacts that should be going back to other countries. Funnily enough, I just saw a news article yesterday in Glasgow, some stuff that ended up in Glasgow that was stolen from India, and we're going to hand it back to them. We're going to hand it back to the people in India. So I think that's a good gesture, even though it's maybe years
Way overdue.
way overdue, as you say, Raymond, way overdue. And I think a lot more should be done to send stuff back that was stolen by the Brit regime. They've got 4 floors in the British Museum, and there are other museums in London that are exactly the same, full of artifacts stole from other countries. And the mentality of these people is that they seem to think they've got some right to steal this, and they seem to think it's okay. They seem to think their empire was okay, even though they killed over 2 billion people. I don't understand that. The morality of it. I just don't see the morality of thinking it's okay to kill 2 billion people in the most evil empire that has ever existed on this planet.
Yeah. Well, do you want to tell us about the specific parts of tomorrow's events? Basically, you mentioned already. You mentioned the protest outside of Westminster.
Yes, we're going to,
but you got also things planned as well, right?
yeah, once we protest outside Westminster, we're going to go to Westminster Abbey, because that's where the body of Mary Queen of Scots lies, in Westminster Abbey. And you couldn't make this up either, what I'm going to tell you. In Westminster Abbey, where her body lies, the body of Elizabeth I, who was her cousin, who ordered their execution, is lying in the same place, Westminster Abbey. Also, the body of Edward I, who was known as Hammer of the Scots. This was the King of England that attacked Scotland at the time when William Wallace was around. He was responsible for invading Scotland. He killed 17,000 Scots at Berwick, and then proceeded to every town in Scotland, killing people. Thousands and thousands of Scots were killed under Edward I. And it's absolutely horrendous that the body of Mary Queen of Scots is in that Westminster Abbey, along with the bodies of these tyrants, Edward I and Elizabeth I. So we're trying to campaign to get, I know it's a long time, but we want the body of Mary Queen of Scots repatriated to Scotland. It should not be in Westminster Abbey.
No, definitely not.
So we're going there, Westminster Parliament, then Westminster Abbey, and then we're going in the afternoon to Smithfield, where William Wallace was executed on the 23rd of August in 1305. And on the wall of a hospital there, St. Bartholomew's Hospital, there is a big plaque on the wall, and it's to the immortal memory of Sir William Wallace, who was executed near this spot, 23rd of August, 1305. The reason it says near this spot, by the way, is because that's not where he was executed. An investigation was done through the Guildhall in London, where they keep all historical records, and it was discovered that the place where he was executed is across the road. The place is now called Haberdashers' Hall. Haberdashers' Hall, which is some sort of Masonic hall. Now, when you go across to this place, Haberdashers' Hall, there's these iron railings. And when you look through the iron railings at the back, the spot where the gallows were, where all these people were executed, they have a big, massive sign that says, "Serve and obey." Now, is that not telling you something? The spot where they killed all these people who are against the hierarchy of the Westminster system, they have a sign that says, "Serve and obey." So if you don't serve and obey, they try to wipe you out.
Definitely, yeah.
A bit more difficult for them these days. The days of people being hung, drawn, and quartered are over, but certainly in recent years there have been a few strange deaths For example, we had a Scottish National Party MP called Willie McRae, who died in mysterious circumstances on the 7th of April in 1985. In the remote part of the Highlands, he was found in his car, slumped over the steering wheel with a gunshot to the back of his head. Although the gun was 30 feet away, said that he committed suicide. So I've never known anybody commit suicide with a gun 30 feet from him. This is all facts because it was in the police report that the gun was 30 feet and the man was slumped over the steering wheel of his car with a gunshot to the back of his head at the ear, right through his brain. Horrible death. Now, you may remember there was another horrible death that took place in 2003. That was Dr. David Kelly. Now, this was the time of the Iraq War. And Dr. David Kelly was a British government scientist, and he was investigating weapons in Iraq, and his investigation proved that there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So he was called before a parliamentary committee to explain himself as to why he was saying there was no weapons of mass destruction, because the media had been telling people for months that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that's the reason why they had to attack Iraq and go to war. But he stuck to his guns, Dr. David Kelly, and 2 days later he was found dead in mysterious circumstances. His body was full of drugs and his wrists had been slit. There was a packet of drugs was nearby, and so was the knife that he'd supposedly slit his wrist with. But a very important point is there was no fingerprints on the packet of drugs, and there was no fingerprints on the knife. So something very mysterious happened there. It looked like another murder by the Brit state. And there was another guy who most people believe was murdered by the Brit state, and that was Robin Cook, who was Foreign Secretary, friends of Tony Blair. He spoke out against the Iraq War. Of course, it was Blair that was leading the call to go ahead with the Iraq War. Robin Cook spoke out against the Iraq War, and similar circumstances. He went on a holiday up the Highlands, and he fell apparently when he was up the Highlands. So the story goes, fell from a ledge, and was dead. Now, a few days later at his funeral, Tony Blair, his supposed lifelong friend, didn't turn up for his funeral. So what does that tell you?
Yeah.
So these are 3 that most people are 100% adamant were murdered by the Brit state. Other people have mentioned people like Princess Diana should be included, but it's 50-50 on that one. There's a lot of people believe that she was murdered by the Brit state, but there's not enough evidence to say it's 100%. So we couldn't include that because we've got 3 posters that we're going to take on this protest. One is to Robin Cook, who we mentioned just a second ago, to Dr. David Kelly, and to Willie McRae. And we've got the picture, and we've got in big letters, murdered by the Brit state. So we're going to do the protest using these posters. We'll possibly have 5 or 10 minutes before the security move in to move us. But when we're told to move, we will move. But we'll have enough time to do the protest, I'm sure of it.
Definitely.
So that's the protest.
That's basically all that you have to do is adhere to their rules and then move and then continue on a different spot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the afternoon, we're going to Smithfield to remember William Wallace. So that's the schedule of events anyway, Raymond.
All right, cool. Well, as I tend to say, I'm geographically challenged, so I cannot be there.
Yeah.
But is there anything you want to say to people that might? Well, I was thinking about going to London anyway. What do you want
Well,
to say to them if they want to join you?
well, if there's anybody in London who wants to come along, come along. We've had this event many times before. The last 2 years we haven't had it because of the COVID situation, but we've had this event many times before. And quite honestly, the people that do go to the event are amazed at the history that they listen to about the events leading up to Wallace's capture and how not only him, but many, many other people were killed at that place. It must be one of the worst killing places on this planet, to tell you the truth, as well as all the people that were hung, drawn, and quartered way back in the time of William Wallace. As we reached the Middle Ages, there was multi-thousands of people were burnt at the stake. That was a killing method that was used in the 1500s and the 1600s. And some people who are spiritual, some people who you would describe as mediums, have gone to this area in Smithfield, and it's the stories they tell are horrific about the screaming of people who are murdered in such horrific circumstances, burnt to death at the stake. It's absolutely horrific place to be. Now, the other thing about Smithfield, the name Smithfield comes from smooth field. It's a very, very flat area. But for the last 50, 100 years or so, it's been a place where meat has been traded. It is now the biggest meat market in Europe. The stench of dead flesh would knock you back. Honestly, it's a big, big, massive place, meat market on the run up to the hospital where the plaque is on the wall to William Wallace. It's a meat market, the Smithfield area.
All right. Well, again, if people want to join the event tomorrow, contact the Scottish Resistance, either James personally or through the page. And
Yeah,
if you want to join, you'll be more than welcome. And I'm sure you're going to have a good time. Um, just not just the history part, but the camaraderie, and also the remembering one of Scotland's greatest heroes.
yeah. We're going to
Um,
have a piper there as well, Raymond. There'll be a
yeah,
pipe,
yeah,
and there will also be singers there as well. So
great to
it's
hear.
a good event. And I've got to tell you that every time we've had this event, the people that attend it say, that was brilliant. I wish more people would come to this and watch what happens, listen to the history, listen to the piper, listen to the singers. I wish more people would come to it.
Yeah,
But it's not just about getting a big crowd there, because what will happen is it will go out to multi-thousands through social media.
definitely.
So the people that were there have got the best view. I'm telling you, when they actually witness the place where these terrible deeds took place and go to the plaque on the wall to William Wallace. And round the corner from it, there's a church there, and there's a plaque to William Wallace there as well. The church of St. Bartholomew the Great, we go there as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we go to Haberdashers Hall,
Yeah,
and I show people if they look through the railings, they can see the sign saying "Serve and Obey." So it's an interesting day out. It really
definitely,
is.
definitely, definitely. And everything's going to be filmed as well.
Yeah, we have two live streamers, and we'll
Cool,
also have lots of people taking photographs. So
brilliant,
if your media company want to use some of the footage, no problem at all.
awesome, awesome. Definitely going to do that. Well, I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview with James. I want to thank you, James, and have a great time tomorrow and a good trip tonight, of course.
Yeah,
And hope to see you at the next show on the 29th.
yeah,
And hope everybody's going to watch that as well. We're probably going to talk about the Smithfield event as well.
that's fine.
All
Thank you,
right.
Raymond.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Um,